Chapter 2, On the Road. I was up an hour before dawn, but Mam was already in the kitchen, cooking my favorite breakfast, bacon and eggs. Dad came downstairs while I was mopping the plate with my last slice of bread. As we said goodbye, he pulled something from his pocket and placed it in my hands. It was the small tinder box that had belonged to his own dad, and to his granddad before that, one of his favorite possessions. "I want you to have this, son," he said. "It might come in useful in your new job. And come back and see us soon. Just because you've left home, it doesn't mean that you can't come back and visit." "It's time to go, son," Mam said, walking across to give him a final hug. "He's at the gate. Don't keep him waiting." We were a family that didn't like too much fuss, and we'd already said our goodbyes. I walked out into the yard alone. The spook was on the other side of the gate, a dark silhouette against the gray dawn light. His hood was up and he was standing straight and tall, his staff in his left hand. I walked toward him, carrying my small bundle of possessions, feeling very nervous. To my surprise, the spook opened the gate and came into the yard. "Well, lad," he said, "follow me. We might as well start the way we mean to go on." Instead of heading for the road, he led the way north, directly towards Hangman's Hill, and soon we were crossing the north pasture, my heart already starting to thump. When we reached the boundary fence, the spook climbed over with the ease of a man half his age, but I froze. As I rested my hands against the top edge of the fence, I already heard the sounds of the trees creaking against their branches bent and bowed under the weight of the hanging men. "What's the matter, lad?" asked the spook, turning to look back at me. "If you're frightened of something on your own doorstep, you'll be of little use to me." I took a deep breath and clambered over the fence. We trudged upward, the dawn light darkening as we moved up into the gloom of the trees. The higher we climbed, the colder it seemed to get, and soon I was shivering. It was the kind of cold that gives you goose pimples and makes the hair on the back of your neck start to rise. It was a warning that something wasn't quite right. I'd felt it before when something had come close that didn't belong in this world. Once we'd reached the summit of the hill, I could see them below me. There had to be 100 at least, sometimes 2 or 3 hanging from the same tree, wearing soldiers' uniforms with broad leather belts and big boots. Their hands were tied behind their backs, and all of them behaved differently. Some struggled desperately so that the branch above them bounced and jerked, while others were just spinning slowly on the end of the rope, pointing first one way and then the other. As I watched, I suddenly felt a strong wind on my face, a wind so cold and fierce that it couldn't have been natural. The trees bowed low and their leaves shriveled and began to fall. Within moments, all the branches were bare. When the wind had eased, the spook put his hand on my shoulder and guided me nearer to the hanging men. We stopped just feet away from the nearest. "Look at him," said the spook. "What do you see?" "A dead soldier," I replied, my voice beginning to wobble. "How old does he look?" 17 at most." "Good. Well done, lad. Now tell me, do you still feel scared?" "A bit. I don't like being so close to him." "Why? There's nothing to be afraid of. Nothing that can hurt you. Think about what it must have been like for him. Concentrate on him rather than yourself. How must he have felt? What would be the worst thing?" I tried to put myself in the soldier's place and imagine how it would have been to die like that. The pain and the struggle for breath would have been terrible, but there might have been something even worse. He'd have known he was dying, and that he'd never be able to go home again. Then he'd never see his family again, I told the spook. With those words, a wave of sadness washed over me. Then, even as that happened, the hanging men slowly began to disappear until we were alone on the hillside and the leaves were back on the trees. "How do you feel now? Still afraid?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I just feel sad." "Well done, lad. You're learning. We're the 7th sons of 7th sons, and we have the gift of seeing things that others can't. But that gift can sometimes be a curse. If we're afraid, sometimes there are things that can feed on that fear. Fear makes it worse for us. The trick is to concentrate on what you can see and stop thinking about yourself. It works every time." "It was a terrible sight, lad, but they're just ghasts," continued the spook. "There's nothing much we can do about them, and they'll just fade away in their own time. In 100 years or so, there'll be nothing left." I felt like telling him that Mam did do something about them once, but I didn't. To contradict him would have gotten us off on a bad start. "Now, if they were ghosts, that would be different," said the spook. "You can talk to ghosts and tell them what's what. Just making them realize that they've died is a great kindness and an important step in getting them to move on. Usually a ghost is a bewildered spirit trapped on this earth that not knowing what's happened, so often they're in torment. Then again, there are others here with a definite purpose, and they might have things to tell you. But a ghast is just a fragment of a soul that's gone on to better things. That's what these are, lad, just ghasts. You saw the trees change. The leaves fell, and it was winter. Well, the leaves are back now, so you were just looking at something from the past. Just a reminder of evil things that sometimes happen on this earth. Usually if you're brave, they can't see you, and they don't feel anything. And a ghast is just like a reflection in a pond that stays behind when its owner has moved on. Understand what I'm saying? I nodded. Right, so that's one thing sorted out. We'll be dealing with the dead from time to time, so you might as well get used to them. Anyway, let's get started. We've got quite a way to go. Here, from now on, you'll be carrying this. The spook handed me his big leather bag and without a backward glance headed up the hill. I followed him over its crest, then down through the trees toward the road, which was a distant gray scar meandering its way south through the green and brown patchwork of fields. Done much traveling, lad? The spook called back over his shoulder. Seen much of the county? I told him I'd never been more than 6 miles from my dad's farm. Going to the local market was the most traveling I'd ever done. The spook muttered something under his breath and shook his head. I could tell that he wasn't best pleased by my answer. Well, your travels start today, he said. We're headed south toward a village called Horseshaw. It's just over 15 miles as the crow flies, and we have to be there before dark. I heard of Horseshaw. It was a pit village and had the largest coal yards in the county, holding the output of dozens of surrounding mines. I'd never expected to go there, and I wondered what the spook's business could be in a place like that. He walked at a furious pace, taking big, effortless strides. Soon I was struggling to keep up, as well as carrying my own small bundle of clothes and other belongings. I now had his bag, which seemed to be getting heavier by the minute. Then, just to make things worse, it started to rain. About an hour before noon, the spook came to a sudden halt. He turned around and stared hard at me. By then, I was about 10 paces behind. My feet were hurting, and I'd already developed a slight limp. The road was little more than a track that was quickly turning to mud. Just as I caught up with him, I stubbed my toe, slipped, and almost lost my balance. He tutted. Feeling dizzy, lad? He asked. I shook my head. I wanted to give my arm a rest, but it didn't seem right to put his bag down in the mud. That's good, said the spook with a faint smile, the rain dripping from the edge of his hood down onto his beard. Never trust a man who's dizzy. That's something well worth remembering. I'm not dizzy, I protested. No? Asked the spook, raising his bushy eyebrows. Then it must be your boots. They won't be much use in this job. My boots were the same as my dad's and Jack's, sturdy enough and suitable for the mud and muck of the farmyard, but the kind that needed a lot of getting used to. A new pair usually cost you a fortnight's blisters before your feet got bedded in. I looked down at the spooks. They were made of strong, good-quality leather, and they had extra thick soles. They must have cost a fortune, but I suppose that for someone who did a lot of walking, they were worth every penny. They flexed as he walked, and I just knew that they'd be comfortable from the very first moment he pulled them on. Good boots are important in this job, said the spook. We depend on neither man nor beast to get us where we need to go. If you rely on your own 2 legs, then they won't let you down. So if I finally decide to take you on, I'll get you a pair of boots just like mine. Until then, you'll have to manage as best as you can. At noon, we halted for a short break, sheltering from the rain in an abandoned cattle shed. The spook took a piece of cloth out of his pocket and unwrapped it, revealing a large lump of yellow cheese. He broke off a bit and handed it to me. I'd seen worse and I was hungry, so I wolfed it down. The spook only ate a small piece himself, before wrapping the rest up and stuffing it back in his pocket. Once out of the rain, he'd pulled his hood back, so I now had the chance to look at him properly for the first time. Apart from the full beard and the hangman's eyes, his most notable feature was his nose, which was grim and sharp, with a curve to it that suggested a bird's beak. The mouth, when closed, was almost hidden by that mustache and beard. The beard itself had looked gray at first glance, but when I looked closer, trying to be as casual as possible so that he wouldn't notice, I saw that most of the colors of the rainbow seemed to be sprouting there. There were shades of red, black, brown, and obviously lots of gray, but as I came to realize later, it all depended on the light. Weak jaw, weak character, my dad always used to say, and now he also believed that some men wear beards just to hide that fact. Looking at the spook, though you could see despite the beard that his jaw was long, and when he opened his mouth he revealed yellow teeth that were very sharp and more suited to gnawing on red meat than not nibbling at cheese. With a shiver, I certainly realized that he reminded me of a wolf. And it wasn't just the way he looked. He was a kind of predator because he hunted the dark. Living merely on nibbles of cheese would make him always hungry and mean. If I completed my apprenticeship, I'd end up just like him. "You still hungry, lad?" he asked, his green eyes boring hard into my own, until I started to feel a bit dizzy. I was soaked to the skin and my feet were hurting, but most of all I was hungry, so I nodded, thinking he might offer me some more, but he just shook his head and muttered something to himself. Then once again he looked at me sharply. "Hunger is something you're going to have to get used to," he said. "We don't eat much when we're working, and if the job's very difficult, we don't eat anything at all until afterward. Fasting's the safest thing because it makes us less vulnerable to the dark. It makes us stronger. So you might as well start practicing now, because when we get to Horseshaw, I'm going to give you a little test. You're going to spend a night in a haunted house, and you're going to do it alone. That'll show me what you're really made of."